right. So some of us are here. Maybe we'll wait a minute till everyone's here. So hold on 1 second while I get everything ready. So we're ready for chapter 14 tonight, which is quite long and complicated, but it's an excellent chapter, very important, where we finally get to take a look at exchange rates. So let's find out what that's all about. All right, let's get this open. All right, so 14, A and B, that is. There we go. All right, so let's see. Now what I'm going to do here is open up Bloomberg for some currency quotes that are current, more current than what's in those slides, because we want to understand what's happening right now. All right, so let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 4. All right, I'll tell you. Let's just wait 1 more minute and then we'll get started. All right, I'll tell you what, let's just get going. All right, so here we have chapter 14, and you can see that the title is the foreign exchange market. And so we're going to be looking very carefully at, obviously, exchange rates. And of course, you can see from the slide that an exchange rate is really just the price of one currency in terms of another. In other words, it's the rate at which I can trade one currency for another. And if you've ever traveled abroad, you know how this works. You hand over your dollars and you get a foreign currency, and which you use in that foreign country. And then when you get home, you can use your foreign currencies to buy back US dollars. Of course, either in both directions, you end up losing money, but that's just the way it works. So first, why don't we take a look at some quotes here? Now, these are quite outdated, so I want to show you more current ones. For example, if you look here, this is the exchange rate between the dollar and the British pound. That cool symbol there is the British pound. The pound is an extremely ancient currency. It's been around since at least 800 AD. And so there's a lot of theories about what that symbol actually means. And of course, at one point in history, when all coins were made out of silver, the British pound was always considered to be one of the strongest currencies in the world, partially because the coins were of a consistent size and weight, which is a big challenge throughout the Middle Ages to make coins that were consistent with each other. So when the monetary standard is based on silver, or gold for that matter, it means that the weight of each coin is what determines its actual value, not what it says on the face of it, but the actual weight. So the British coins were considered to be the most reliable. They weighed the same amount most consistently compared to other countries. And so that L supposedly stands for the Latin word. Let me look it up for you. I think it was Libra or something along those lines. Yeah, let's see. There we go. Oh, there it is. All right, I was on the right neighborhood. The pound sign is the symbol for the pound sterling, the currency of the United Kingdom. The same symbol is used for other currencies. Okay. I thought there was some history here. Oh, here it is. It derives from the uppercase Latin L, representing Libra Pondo, the basic unit of weight in the Roman Empire, which in turn is derived from the Latin word Libra. There it is, meaning scales or a balance. And of course, you all know that That's one of the signs of the zodiac, Libra, and it does literally mean the scales. So the L for pound apparently comes from that word Libra because, like I said, in the Middle Ages, coins could be of all kinds of sizes and shapes. And so what would happen is when you bought something, you would actually have to have your coins weighed. Nobody would take your word for it that it had a certain amount of silver in it. So instead, they always had to be weighed. Now, according to, oh, I didn't see this. It is not certain when the lions. Huh, interesting. So the pound has a very interesting history. That's why I wanted to mention it here. And so these others now here, this one is clearly the Japanese yen, the Y with two lines through it. At this point in time, it took 111.03 yen to buy a single US dollar. And then finally, this symbol, a very new symbol, this is for the euro, which has only been around since January 1999. And in fact, that symbol was chosen uh, actually the bank of the central the European Central Bank actually wanted to make sure that they didn't just arbitrarily pick a symbol for the euro. They actually put it up for a vote to the public in these countries that use the euro and asked them which symbol they liked the best. So this one was the first symbol for a currency that was ever chosen as part of a popularity contest, basically. In fact, why don't we go to Wikipedia and see what they have to say about it? Symbol of the euro, or history of the euro symbol. The design was presented to the public by the European Commission on December 12, 1996. And this is the one. Oh my God, there were originally 32 designs. I did not know that. Then they knocked it down to 10. They were put up to a public survey. After the survey had narrowed the original 10 down to 2, the commission chose the final design. But they did use input from the public. And of course, that is not the case for these other symbols. They sort of evolved over time. And interestingly enough, the symbol for the dollar, which we all know very well, nobody's absolutely sure where that originally comes from. In spite of the fact that the dollar is a new currency relative to the other countries, nobody seems to be sure where that symbol originally comes from. There's a lot of theories about it, but you would think that somebody would have written it down somewhere, but apparently not. Somewhere along the way, people started using that to represent dollars, and nobody knows how or why this happened, but it caught on, and so we've been using it throughout our entire history. All right. Well, anyway, so these are the quotes that were valid in 2016. Let's take a look at what they look like now. So, for example, it now takes $1.20.9 to buy a single euro. There it is. I don't know if you can see it. It's very faint on here. It takes about 105.71 Japanese yen to buy a single US dollar. And it takes about $1.39 US to buy a British pound, which is up from about $1.20 a couple of years ago. That was part of the fallout of the Brexit. Remember when Brexit first came along, everybody was so upset and horrified. The pound got as low as, I think, $1.20 at that time. Now it's bouncing back up a little bit. But in the past, before Brexit, it was normal for it to trade for anywhere from $1.60 to $1.70 a pound. That was pretty normal. We have a lot of other ones here too, which we'll go through them later on too. But I just wanted you to notice these because these are some of the most important currency pairs. For example, you'll notice we also have the exchange rate between the U.S. and Australian dollar, and over here you can see that it takes 1.26, basically $1.27 Canadian to buy a single U.S. dollar. The Canadian dollar bounces up and down with the U.S. dollar. There have been periods when, within the last 15 years, when it could take up to $1.50 to buy a US dollar, and there were other periods when it was almost 1-to-1. So currencies do tend to fluctuate quite a bit. And in fact, we're going to analyze the reasons for that in this chapter. Why are currencies so volatile? Why do they change so much? What's going on? You don't see this kind of thing with interest rates, but with currencies, the values can change dramatically from one year to the next, and even within the same year. So let's try to find out why. But first, let's note that each of these exchange rates can be quoted in two different ways. For example, if we look at these, they're all quoted in a specific way. Like here, for example, we see that it takes $1 and 20.9 US to buy €1. They could have just as easily written it the other way around. Okay, so in other words, let's see what that would have worked out to be. If it takes 1.20, hold on one second. $1.2090 per euro implies 1 over 1.2090, or it turns out to be 0.827 euros per dollar. Okay, and one is simply the inverse of the other. Now, the direct terms quote is the domestic currency price of the foreign currency. So from the perspective of the US, this would be direct terms. Okay, because all goods in the United States are quoted as so many dollars per unit of that good. And so this is no exception. So we call this direct terms. But over here, this would be called indirect terms. And of course, they both mean the same thing. But for whatever reason, by convention, there's certain quotes that you tend to see. For example, if you look in any online article about currencies, you'll typically see that the dollar euro exchange rate is quoted as dollars per euro. For the yen, it tends to be yen per dollar. And for the pound, it tends to be dollars per pound. Why? This is what people prefer. It's just the way it is. But we always can figure out the opposite if we really need to do so. All right. Okay, well, that's that. Now, we also have this concept of cross exchange rates. These are exchange rates that do not involve the dollar. And in fact, we have a bunch of them on the Bloomberg page as well. But let's look at this example first. On May 31st, 2016, it would have taken about 162.29 yen to buy a British pound. Now, where did this come from? What they've actually done is they've taken the yen dollar quote and multiply it by the dollar pound quote to come up with this number, which is known as a cross exchange rate, because the dollar does not appear in there. Although indirectly it does, because that's where these numbers come from. Okay, that's all it is. It's just a combination of these two quotes. And here you see some of them too, like euro yen, for example. It takes 127.79 yen to buy a single euro. And this is a cross exchange rate, but you can be sure that it was derived from the US dollar, Japanese yen exchange rate, and this one, euro per dollar. In fact, you can figure it out right now. Why don't we prove it? Let's try that. So what do we have here? We have two quotes. We have, now keep in mind, by the way, I do want to point out this is a very bizarre convention in the markets. It's always done this way, and I don't understand it myself, but when it says EUR-USD, they really mean this. Dollars, 1.2091 per euro. You'd think this would drive people crazy, but this is how it's done. Then this one is yen, 105.68 per dollar. So if you were to combine these, you could come up with this one, which is yen per euro. In spite of the way it's written, it's yen per euro. Now, how would you do this? Well, let's imagine we take these two quotes. Let's write it like this. You'll see why in a minute. If I multiply them like this, you can see the dollars cancel each other out. And so what I'm doing here is multiplying 105.68 times 1.2091 to get 1.277, let's say 8 yen per euro. Okay, and if we look at the quotes, that's more or less, yeah, I mean, except for slight rounding differences, that's what that represents. So we call that a cross exchange rate. Because it does not directly mention the dollar. But it does come from the dollar itself, as you can see. It's not determined independently. We'll see why later on that can't happen. Now, why is all this happening? Well, because the dollar has a unique role in the world economy. It is referred to as the world's vehicle currency. What does that mean? Well, what happens is at any given point in time, there's usually one currency which is considered to be the dominant currency in world trade. Whatever that currency is, we call it the vehicle currency, and all of the other exchange rates are quoted with respect to that currency. And in fact, a lot of prices are determined in that currency as well. Now, for many years, the British pound was considered to be the vehicle currency, especially during the Victorian days, as you can imagine, when the British Empire was pretty mighty. But what really put a stop to that was World War I. After World War I, most of Europe was pretty much destroyed, and the US emerged as the dominant power in the world. And since that time, the dollar has been considered to be the world's vehicle currency. And there's always talk in the press about, oh, eventually it'll be taken over by the yen or the euro or the Chinese currency, the yen, it's also called. It hasn't happened, and I don't think it's going to. There's a lot of reasons for that. It's like so much business is done with the US. We're the major buyer of most countries' exports. Um, American culture is everywhere. Everybody uses, watches our shows and everything. With the internet is all largely done in English. Yeah, it would be very difficult to imagine another currency taking the role of the dollar. And so, for the foreseeable future, it looks like the dollar will continue to serve as the world's vehicle currency. And it's more than just that, too. It's like political stability, the strength of the economy, the low inflation rate. There's a lot of reasons why the dollar is attractive as the vehicle currency. Okay, now talking about cross exchange rates, we're going to introduce an incredibly important concept next, which is referred to as arbitrage. We're going to see a lot of that in financial markets courses. And arbitrage basically is a situation where risk-free profits can be earned by simultaneously buying a relatively underpriced asset and selling a relatively overpriced asset. Now, you might say to yourself, well, I wish I could find me one of these arbitrage opportunities. The problem is this requires markets to be inefficient, okay? So in other words, to the extent that markets are efficient, you're not going to find these opportunities. But it's important to know how we could take advantage of any temporary mispricings. And so there are different kinds of arbitrages that we want to consider in this course, okay? And so we're going to see our first one in a second, and this one involves the cross exchange rate. Okay, so just remember, anytime you hear the word arbitrage, risk-free profits can be earned. And in fact, why don't I show you a quick example of that? This is a very simple case. Imagine the following situation. Suppose that the exchange rate between the dollar and the pound is $2 per pound, just to keep it simple. Okay, a gold dealer in New York is offering to buy or sell gold for, let's say, 1,400 per ounce. I've forgotten. I'm not sure what the current price is. In fact, I'll tell you what. Why don't we look it up? Okay. Oh, it's up around 17. All right. I'll tell you what. Let's round it to 1,800. Okay. A gold dealer in London is offering to buy or sell gold for, let's say, 1,000 pounds. Actually, I do have that symbol right there. Okay. Now, you might look at yourself and say, so what? What do you notice about these numbers? Is there something strange going on here? Yes, there is. What? Okay, well, here's the thing. If we convert both prices into dollars, we have the New York price is, of course, $1,800 an ounce. But in London, 1,000 pounds per ounce is multiplied by the exchange rate of $2 per pound. And guess what? That translates into $2,000 per ounce. So, what should we do as smart investors? Well, this is a golden opportunity, golden opportunity to take advantage of these prices with arbitrage. So in other words, since the gold is relatively overpriced in London and relatively underpriced in New York, an investor can earn arbitrage profits by, first of all, you borrow money, buy gold in New York at 1,800 per ounce, sell the gold you just bought in London at $2,000 an ounce. So what is that going to accomplish? Well, you can see for yourselves that you are actually earning profits earning risk-free profits without investing any of your own money. Okay, due to the discrepancy in the prices of gold in New York and London. This leads to a $200 per ounce profit and is known as an arbitrage profit. So in other words, for each ounce that you do this, you magically put $200 of profits in your pocket without taking any risks or even investing your own money. This is what we mean by arbitrage, a risk-free profit that comes about through pricing discrepancies between two markets. Now, will this situation last forever? No, because here's the thing. So currently, let's recap. The price in New York is 1,800, and the price in London is 2,000. Okay, so now what's going to happen here, of course, as you understand from supply and demand, which you've obviously been exposed to before, I hope, in the process, buying gold in New York and selling it in London, two things will happen. Number one, it'll push up the price in New York. The price will rise in New York. The price will fall in London until they are equal again. At this time, all arbitrage profits are gone. That's it. There's no more. So hopefully you jumped in there in time to take advantage of this. Okay, so this is an example of what an arbitrage looks like. Will this ever happen? Probably not. But put it, yes. And this is one of the reasons why the prices will be the same in both markets. And in fact, there is a principle in economics, which is called the law of one price, states that a good will sell for the same price in all markets after adjusting for the exchange rate. Otherwise, arbitrage will result. Okay, so there's the law of one price says that's what you expect. It should be the same in all prices, in all markets, after we take into account the exchange rate. Okay, so now that we've had a quick introduction to arbitrage in general, we're going to look at a specific kind of arbitrage, which involves cross-exchange rates, okay? So let's look at how arbitrage could potentially arise with cross-exchange rates. We're going to claim here that if there's an inconsistency between the currency quotes, let's go back here for a second and revisit what we did before. If there's an inconsistency between these three quotes, these two dollar quotes, and this cross exchange rate, then arbitrage opportunities will arise. All right, these three have to be consistent with each other. In other words, if this cross exchange rate is, let's say, $1.20 or $1.30, that means there's a problem. There's going to be an arbitrage opportunity because something's not right. But we have to figure out how to take advantage of it. All right, so, this is the another example. This is not the gold example. This is the cross exchange rate example where, let's say that just to keep it simple, currently it takes $2 to buy a British pound. And in London, there's a foreign exchange dealer who will quote us a cross exchange rate of 250 yen per pound. And then finally in Tokyo, there's another dealer who's offering 120 yen per dollar. Now, do you see anything wrong with those three quotes? Are they consistent with each other? Well, they're not consistent with each other, are they? How do I know that? Well, let's take a look. What if you had those two quotes? Let's bring them all together. So we have $2 per pound. And we have, this is New York. In Tokyo, the quote we were offered is 120 yen per dollar. If I multiply those together, I should come up with, and these dollars cancel out, 240 yen per pound. And yet the cross exchange rate in London is actually 250 yen per pound. So we do have an inconsistency. And how do we take advantage of it? Now, it was much simpler with the gold. It was easy. There's two markets. We buy in one, we sell in the other. End of story. This one is a lot more complicated because there's three markets involved. So we have to sit down and figure out how to take care of this. We need to make profits. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to draw a special diagram, which I'd like to show you. Let me just jump ahead a little bit here. We're going to create this very special diagram where we have near the United States over here, Great Britain, and in Tokyo here in Japan. And each of these circles represents a different market. And each of these legs of this triangle has a different exchange rate quote on it. And so we're going to assume that we start with a fixed amount of dollars, and we're going to work our way around the triangle and see what we end up with. Now, remember that the dollar-pound exchange rate was quoted at $2 per pound. The cross exchange rate was 250 yen per pound. And then finally, the yen-dollar exchange rate was quoted as 120 yen per dollar. So let's assume that I'm a trader in the United States, and I see that there's an inconsistency here. In particular, this can't be right because it's not consistent with these two quotes. So I decide to do the following. I take my $1 million and go to London and convert them into £500,000. Okay, it's $1 million. And here I'm actually dividing by $2 per pound to come up with 500,000 pounds. Now, once I get those pounds in my hands, I use this cross exchange rate to convert them into yen. How do I do that? I multiply And again, if you're not sure whether to multiply or divide, write them out and see which units cancel out. The product of these two is 125 million yen. Now I'm going to take my yen back to the United States. I'm going to take 125 million yen and divide that by the dollar-yen exchange rate. And that's going to leave me with $1,041,667. So did I make money? Why, yes, I did. I made 41,667 in arbitrage profits. And it's probably, the whole thing took no time at all. In ancient times, this would have required a few phone calls. Now it's all a few punches of the computer's buttons. And before you know it, I've locked in an arbitrage profit of roughly $40,000. How did I do it? Well, the one thing I want to point out here is that the reason why this is happening is because, oh, for God's sake. There we go. Right here, I'm being offered too many yen for each pound that I trade in compared to the actual equilibrium rate of 240 per yen. So what I want to do is get my hands on British pounds and turn them into yen at this very lucrative exchange rate. Then when I take my yen and turn them back into dollars at the correct exchange rate, I should find myself with more dollars than I started out with. Oh, see, now this is tricky. I want to point out here, though, now here I'm assuming that we started out with dollars. I could have started out with any one of these currencies and I still would have made money as long as I go in this direction. If I went the other way, if I went counterclockwise, I would have ended up losing money. So the placement of the circles is not really that important, but once they're in place, you have to make sure you're going in the right direction. Now, fortunately, if you do go in the wrong direction, at least as far as our tests are concerned, you'll find yourself losing money and you'll know to just flip everything around. As a trader, if you go in the wrong direction, you're probably going to end up losing your job. So this is important. But this is how an arbitrage works with three markets like this. And so you can see why it's called triangular arbitrage, because it looks like a big triangle. Okay, so we could actually we could have as many of these as we want. We could try any number of examples. Now, what I would like you to point out to you here too is that if we had the correct exchange rate right here at 240 rather per pound, and you went around the circle, you would have just ended up with $1 million, just like you started out with. Okay, because here you would have only gotten 120,000 yen, and that would have been exactly enough to buy back $1 million US. So the cross exchange rate, the correct one, is the only exchange rate at which there are no arbitrage opportunities. And that's how we know that it is the correct one. Okay, so yes, I showed you here, if you go backwards, whoops, you're going to start out with $1 million and uh-oh, what happened? We went around the wrong way and we ended up with $960,000. That's not good. All right. So that would mean you have to go in the opposite direction to earn your profits. And of course, again, the whole thing comes from this number being incorrect or inconsistent with respect to the other two exchange rates. Now, I also pointed out here that you could start with pounds. Like I said before, instead of starting with $1 million, you could start with £500,000. As long as you go around the circle in the correct direction, you'll end up with profits anyway. It's just that they'll be in pounds instead of dollars. Okay, and of course, this also implies that I could do the same thing with yen. I could start with yen in the bottom right-hand corner. It doesn't matter. I'm still going to make a profit as long as this is inconsistent with the others and as long as I'm going in the right direction. All right, so let's check this out. And so if you here started with 125 million yen and you work your way around the circle, you can see that you're going to wind up with 130,208,375 yen, which obviously means you made money. So this is our first type of arbitrage that we want to consider. There's more coming, but I thought we'd start here because it seems pretty straightforward. It's a little complicated. Now, by the way, if you use the circles in a different order, like let's say if I put yen over here and pounds down here or something, it might change the direction at which you can make money. All right. So if I change the order of these circles, I might find out that I have to go counterclockwise to make money. That depends on the particular setup you've chosen for your circles. All right. So now that was a lot to cover in a short time. We now understand what arbitrage is. We saw it with the gold example. That was a very simple case. And now we've extended it to a much more complicated case, the triangular arbitrage case, where we have three exchange rates that have to be consistent with each other. And we've seen how to take advantage of discrepancies or mispricings in the marketplace. Now, clearly, this isn't going to last forever either. Just like the gold example, as everybody jumps on the bandwagon, these currencies will appreciate or depreciate in value. This will change, and eventually everything will be back in order. And it won't take that long because, all the traders in the world are looking at the same Bloomberg terminals. They're seeing the same things, and they're going to notice it. And before you know it, everybody's jumping on the bandwagon. The prices will adjust, and before you know it, the opportunity is gone. In fact, this kind of thing is so fast these days that hedge funds, there are certain types of hedge funds that are set up to look for these types of opportunities. They're called statistical arbitrage funds. And what they do is they don't even let people look for these opportunities. They have their computers grind through mountains of data. And when they see something, they immediately execute a trade to take advantage of it. And it's a good thing too, because by the time a human being noticed this, the opportunity would be gone. Because these discrepancies may only last for fractions of a second. Because markets are never perfect, there's going to be some time frame over which opportunities like this can arise, but it's getting to the point where it happens so quickly that really realistically only computers can take advantage of it. So what ends up happening is that people don't do the trading. They write the software that lets the computers do the actual trading. Okay, so that's kind of a side note there. If you're wondering who actually does this kind of thing, it would most likely be statistical arbitrage funds, but it could be anybody. Anybody whose computer happens to notice this, that's been programmed to look for this kind of thing, will be able to take advantage of it. Okay, now we're going to take a step back for a second and remind ourselves, the last time you went to go to a foreign country, you may have noticed something interesting about the exchange rate quotes, which we did not see, by the way, on this Bloomberg page, and I'll explain to you why in a second. You would have walked up to the booth and said, listen, I'm getting ready to jump on a flight to London. I need pounds. And you look at the window and you see that there's two numbers. And it says, for example, $1.2271 per pound, $1.4418 per pound. And you thought, what exactly is going on here? This is the bid price, and this is the ask price. The reason why this is happening is because you're buying your currency from what's called a dealer, which means they make their money by buying and selling currencies at a profit, hopefully, from their customers. So for any currency, they'll give you a quote. This is the one at which the dealer buys, and this is the one at which the dealer sells. And what do you notice about these numbers? You, the customer, so let me add this to the bottom, customer sells. And then here the customer buys. What do you notice about these numbers? No matter what happens, you're always at a disadvantage. You're buying at the higher price and you're selling at the lower price. And this is how the dealer makes their money. Every time somebody makes a trade with them, the dealer comes out ahead. But the dealer is also providing you a service. And so you're effectively compensating the dealer for providing you with this valuable service with this bid-ask spread. And if the amount you're buying is small enough, they may also charge you a fee on top of all of this. So when you're buying small amounts, you're always going to be taken advantage of. But on the other hand, let's face it, then you have the currency you want. So, think of it as paying for a service. It's no different than paying a taxi to take you to the airport on the way over. And then you get inside and you need currency. Well, it's a service somebody's selling you. So the difference between these two prices represents their profit. We call it the bid-ask spread. And you just simply subtract one from the other. By the way, these are usually quoted out to 4 places. So that's why I did it this way. 144.18 minus 122.71, 0.2210. That's what we mean by the bid-ask spread. Now, if you were buying larger amounts, this is like a tourist who's buying 100 pounds. If you are, let's say, a large company and you do a lot of business overseas, let's say you're General Motors and you need to quickly buy 100 million pounds. when you do this as a General Motors, you're going to get a tiny bit ask spread. Like you might find yourself paying like 132.13, 132.42 or something. That's what you might get if you're General Motors buying 100 million pounds. They can afford to do that because it's a huge transaction. So with small transactions, the bid-ask spreads are going to be enormous by comparison. And so that's why it works this way. So then when we look at Bloomberg, why don't they have two numbers? What they've done is they have averaged out the bid and the ask price. This is the average of the two. So you're not going to be able to make a transaction at that quote, but it is an average of the two. Most likely, they've used the Wall Street Journal's quotes are based on transactions of $3 million. So these are the ones with the very small net bid-ask spreads. And all they've done is given you the average. Okay, so we got some more examples in here. Now, this is an important idea. You know that currency values change every day. In fact, they change constantly, but there's two key cases that we want to look at. This is terminology that we need to be familiar with. This is unique to the foreign exchange markets. When a currency gets stronger, we say that it has appreciated in value. And when it weakens, it is said to have depreciated in value. Okay. So let's see, though, if we fully realize what it means to appreciate or depreciate by looking at these quotes. Like here's a simple example. Suppose the exchange rate one day goes from 158.07 per pound to 160. Which currency just got stronger and which got weaker? Well, the logic here is that it now takes more dollars to buy a pound, which means the dollar has depreciated while the pound has appreciated. And that's the reasoning. More dollars are needed to buy a pound. The dollar must have weakened or depreciated. The pound must have strengthened or appreciated. And that's what we mean by this. All right, now we're going to look at another case involving the yen and the dollar. How about this one? Let's say initially it took 88.85 yen to buy a dollar, and then now all of a sudden it takes 90 yen to buy a dollar. What happened? Well, it now takes more yen to buy a dollar, which means the dollar must have appreciated and the yen must have depreciated. Because again, it's the fact that it takes more yen to buy a dollar. That's what ends up happening. All right, excellent. Now, what effect does this have on the economy? We want to now take a look at the big picture for a minute. Suppose the dollar does get stronger or weaker. What effect does that have on the economy? Good question. It clearly has to affect our trade balance, which, as we know, represents the difference between exports and imports. And of course, that number can be negative, as it typically is in the United States. But how does the dollar affect it? Well, let's see. If the dollar gets stronger, or any currency gets stronger, we're going to see a numerical example of this in a minute. Exports become more expensive to foreigners, which means we sell fewer goods to them. But at the same time, though, imports into the United States become cheaper, and therefore we will buy more foreign products. So while it sounds wrong, a stronger dollar actually has the effect of reducing the competitiveness of our goods and services. And therefore, our trade balance gets worse. Okay, so that's the bottom line. The trade balance gets worse. Okay, so, and that's because the dollar is stronger. Now, that happens in the short run, but in the long run, there are also other effects that we need to take into account. Such as, over the longer time horizon, an appreciating currency, though, will reduce inflation through lower import prices, which is kind of nice, but it also may raise our unemployment rate because our exports are becoming less competitive in world markets. So there's always going to be good things and bad things. It's never going to be the case that a change in the exchange rate is universally good or bad. There'll be some benefits and some costs, just like everything else in economics. There's always a trade-off. It's rare that anything brings unalloyed benefits or costs. So I've got a numerical example here so you can see why this is happening. Let's say the exchange rate is $1.60 per pound, and then the dollar strengthens to $1.55 per pound. So clearly the dollar's gotten stronger because it takes fewer dollars to buy a pound. What happens to the value of our imports and exports? Mm. So if there's a British good, let's say we're importing some British good into the US that costs 100 pounds in England. Previously, with the old exchange rate, American consumers would have had to pay $1.60. Now it only costs them $160 versus 155. So of course that means the US will import more British goods because they're cheaper. But let's look at an American product that's being sold in London. Okay, actually, let me leave it there for a second. I want to make sure you have time to write this stuff. All of this will end up on Blackboard, by the way, not just the original slides, but the ones that I'm writing on, in case you missed something. And I know there's a couple of people here who are not here tonight. I don't know if it's the weather or not, but they may want to watch the video and they can't miss any of this good stuff. Okay, so let's take a look now at what happens when in Britain to American goods. So here, this good is something that sells for $100 in the United States. Now, initially, that cost British consumers 62.50 pounds. But look what happens now. It goes up to 64.52. So the US will export fewer goods to the UK. Okay, so what does that mean altogether? US exports are going down. US imports are rising. So what does that tell us? the trade balance gets worse. Okay, so the US trade balance worsens. And that also, of course, means that the UK trade balance improves. Okay, so now we're going to look at the opposite case, of course, where we're going to see the dollar getting weaker. Okay, so what happens if the dollar gets weaker? Exports become less expensive to foreign consumers, thereby increasing our exports, whereas imports become more expensive to domestic consumers, which means we reduce our imports. Okay. Now, let's take a look at a numerical example. Oh, by the way, we also want to consider the longer run over a long time horizon. So the weaker currency is helping our trade balance, okay, because we're selling more, we're buying less. In this case, the trade balance improves. But in the long run, you'll see that there are other effects that we have to think about, among them being, number one, yes, our unemployment rate will drop because we'll have more exports and fewer imports. But at the same time, though, we're going to wind up with more inflation because our import prices are rising. Okay, so those are the things we have to take into account. So let me just quickly summarize that for a second. In the long run, depreciating currency leads to more inflation, less unemployment. Okay, and that, of course, means that in the long run, the opposite happens if we have a strengthening currency. So let me show you that one. So in the long run, an appreciating currency leads to the opposite, less inflation and more unemployment. So there's always a trade-off between the two. Now, in the short run, what we're focused on, though, is the trade balance. So before we had a numerical example with a stronger dollar, now we're going to look at a weaker dollar. So here's an example. Now, remember, it may not seem like it, but when the exchange rate goes up, it means the dollar is actually getting weaker because it's taking more dollars to buy a British pound. Okay, so it's like $1.65 instead of $1.60. So let's see what the impact is on our trade balance. So if we're importing a British good that sells for 100 pounds in London, initially American consumers were paying $160. Now they're paying $165. So imports will fall. Okay, just because it's more money. Whatever this item is, people might switch to an American product because it's now more expensive in terms of dollars, whereas American prices haven't changed. All right, so in England, prices that are a good that sells for $100 in the US has gotten cheaper. So now the British will buy more American goods, so exports to the UK will rise as a result of this. Okay. Yes, and you can see why, because the price changes. American goods are now cheaper than they were, and so British goods will stay the same. And suddenly, people might decide to buy American goods. Now, of course, people who are shopping in London don't really know necessarily that these are American goods. They're just products in the store, and they buy whatever they like and they find to be the cheapest. So, I mean, if you look at all the products that you buy on a regular basis, do you really know which ones are imports? I doubt it, especially at this point in time when many products that we have are partially made in foreign countries and partially made at home. So it's very difficult to be sure what is an American product and what isn't. So that's not really going to enter a person's mind when they decide what to buy. What they're really focused on is the quality of the product and the price. Whichever one they like the best is the one they'll buy. But when the American product becomes cheaper, it'll just be that much more likely that the British consumers will buy it. Nice. Okay. So the net effect here is that with a weaker dollar, our exports rise while our imports fall. And of course, as a result, the US trade balance improves. All right. So again, it sounds sort of counterintuitive, but a stronger dollar actually harms the trade balance, and a weaker dollar actually helps it. All right. So again, I'd like to summarize this for you on another slide. So a stronger dollar weakens the U.S. trade balance, or I guess I'll say worsens the U.S. trade balance, and a weaker dollar improves the U.S. trade balance. Okay, so that's awfully important to know, to understand. So in the media, when they talk about the U.S. trade deficit getting worse, there could be a lot of reasons for it, but it may be because the dollar got stronger. And that may not necessarily be the worst thing in the world. Okay. All right. So now all of a sudden, it's time for another parity case. Another arbitrage case. And so remember before, when we were looking at cross exchange rates, we saw that when there's three exchange rates like that, they have to be consistent with each other to avoid any arbitrage opportunities. In that case, we called the arbitrage that results triangular arbitrage. Here we're looking at something completely different. In order to understand this, we have to introduce a very new idea, something you may not have ever heard of before. So let me do a little bit of a detour here into an area that you may not be familiar with, and that is what we call forward exchange rates. A forward exchange rate is the price of one currency in terms of another when the currency will not be delivered until the future. Okay. So in other words, if you are going to buy a currency, but you're not planning on taking immediate delivery of the currency, the price that you'll be quoted is referred to as a forward exchange rate. You may not have ever heard this before because when we get on a plane and buy currencies for another country, we're taking it with us. We're not waiting for it to be delivered. So in that case, what about all the situations where we buy a currency for immediate delivery? The price of a currency in terms of another, when the currency is delivered immediately, is known as a spot exchange rate. In other words, if you go to the airport and you pay $1.50 for each pound that you buy, that is referred to as the spot exchange rate because you are taking immediate delivery of the pounds. So when would you want to buy a currency and not take immediate delivery? That's an interesting question. Well, because you have a very different motivation then for buying the currency. So again, forward exchange rates for future delivery, spot exchange rates for current or immediate delivery. All right, so let's look at a quick example of this. Suppose that the spot exchange rate between the dollar and the pound is, let's say, just keep it simple, $1.50 per pound. Okay, that means I can buy all the pounds I want for immediate delivery at $1.50. The forward exchange rate for delivery in 3 months is, let's say, $1.52 per pound. Oops. This means that, let's say, anyone can buy pounds for $1.50 for immediate delivery, or $1.52 for delivery in 3 months. So that still leaves open the question of why would you want to ever buy pounds for delivery in 3 months? All right, so here's how that works. In order to buy pounds for future delivery, the investor, let's say, will enter into what's called forward contract. Or actually, I'll tell you what, let's call this the buyer and the seller, just to make it clearer. The buyer will enter into a forward contract with the seller. So in this case, if the buyer wants to have 1,000 pounds in 3 months, he can enter into this contract to buy 1,000 pounds in 3 months for a price of, okay, and so here you just literally multiply the exchange rate, $1.52 per pound, times 1,000 pounds. And so what you're basically agreeing to do is in 3 months, you'll pay $1,520. Right, exactly. So in other words, in 3 months, what you're agreeing to do is pay $1,520 and you will receive 1,000 pounds. So what you're doing here is you're locking in the price at which you can buy the pounds in 3 months. So what kind of situation would you be in if you wanted to do this? Well, let's see. The buyer could be an importer who will buy 1,000 pounds worth of British goods in 3 months, he can wait 3 months and buy the pounds then, or enter into the contract now to buy the pounds in 3 months for a $1.52 per pound. So what exactly is going on here? What happens if he waits 3 months to buy the pounds? If he waits 3 months to buy the pounds, what could go wrong? The exchange rate could rise and the pounds would be more expensive. All right. So in other words, he's being given an opportunity to lock in the price now. He doesn't need them for 3 months and he doesn't want to pay for them for 3 months either, but he does want to lock in the price. Otherwise, what if it goes up to $1.55, for example, or $1.60? He doesn't want to take that risk. So this is a way that you can eliminate your foreign exchange risk by locking in the price today. So in other words, the buyer is hedging the risk that the pound will become more expensive in the future. In other words, the dollar will depreciate. So this is a very popular way of hedging foreign exchange risk with these forward contracts. Now, there's only one potential drawback here. If the pound becomes cheaper in 3 months, the buyer is still committed to paying the price of $1.52 per pound, which means that he cannot take advantage of the lower price, but all the risk is eliminated. All his foreign exchange risk is eliminated. So think of it as an insurance policy. All right. When you buy an insurance policy, you may not ever actually use it, but you still pay for it. Like, in other words, imagine yourself buying auto insurance and never having an accident. Are you upset about it? Well, you're buying peace of mind. Yeah, it's true that you never needed it, but how did you know that? So the forward contract in this case could be thought of as a type of insurance policy. If the price goes up, it doesn't matter. You've got a contract in your hands, which allows you to buy all the pounds you want, or in this case, 1,000 pounds for $1.52, and you don't have to worry about the foreign exchange risk. The drawback is that if the price goes down, then you miss out on the opportunity to save money. All right, whatever. But if you notice too, you do not have to pay to enter into this contract. So it's like an insurance company where there's no premiums, an insurance policy with no premiums. So I think you'll agree that this is a very good strategy for hedging risk. And that's why these things are so popular. The volume of trading in these things is massive, beyond belief massive. And that's because they're so convenient. So the rate that you're quoted is the forward exchange rate. Now, you can actually agree, let me just mention this, in a forward contract, it is also possible to sell a currency in the future. So the buyer is said to have a long position in the contract, and the seller is said to have a short position in the contract. You can do either or. You can buy or sell. That depends on what you are trying to do. So I just want to make that clear. You can buy and you can sell. But no matter which one you do, you're eliminating your risk by entering into this contract. Now, what's also nice about these contracts is that they're perfectly flexible. You can customize them to anything you like. So the contract can be customized so that the buyer can have any quantity of the currency, can choose any currency, and can choose any time of delivery. So you can decide, you're like, listen, here's what I need. I need this currency, this quantity, and this delivery date. And as long as you can find a counterparty to take the other side of this contract, you're all set. So these contracts are typically made with investment banks. So if I need one of these contracts, I may call up Goldman Sachs and say, listen, I'd like to do this with you. They may also be made, oops. They may also be entered into with large commercial banks who are often foreign exchange dealers themselves. For example, JP Morgan Chase is both an investment bank and a commercial bank, like Citibank is a major foreign exchange dealer. So if you're one of their corporate customers and you say, listen, Citibank, I need a contract for 100,000 pounds in 6 months, they'll just say, sure, whatever you want, we'll give it to you. And so you're entering into a contract with another counterparty, they're called. And so you're agreeing that in the future, you'll exchange currencies at the rate quoted in the contract. All right. So you can see it's a very convenient way of hedging risk. It can also be used for speculation as well. So let me mention that too. You can gamble, you can hedge, and you can gamble with these contracts. So forward contracts can be used to hedge foreign exchange risk, speculate on the future value of currencies. All right, so let me show you a very quick example of how that might work. Suppose an investor enters into a forward contract to buy British pounds in 3 months at a price of $1.52, let's say. Okay. Suppose this investor has no exposure to foreign exchange risk. So why is he doing this? He thinks that the dollar will depreciate in the next 3 months. Let's say he thinks it'll go down to $1.45. Okay. Just to keep it simple. So what exactly is he saying here? Oh, sorry. Wait a minute. No, my fault. I should have said $1.65. Let's say no. A depreciation would mean it goes up. Whoops. Yeah, I almost blew it there. Okay, so he has reasonably. Let's say he's. Oh no. Wait a minute. What am I saying? No, I'm sorry. This is the part that's backwards. The dollar will depreciate. No, this is good. Sorry. Yeah, that's right. because here's what's going to happen. This is what he's hoping to do. It's currently, let's say he enters into the contract at $1.52. He's obligated to buy them for $1.52, but he really believes the dollar's heading down. And in 3 months, he thinks it'll be at $1.65 per pound. Now, how does this help him? Okay. So he enters into a contract. Oh, I forgot to mention the amount. Let's say 100,000 pounds. So what's going to happen here is this. The investor is committed to paying, and so we'll have $1.52 per pound times 100,000 pounds. Okay, so we're going to multiply these together. Okay. $152,000 for 100,000 pounds in 3 months. If he is right about the future exchange rate, he will be able to sell these pounds for the new amount, $1.65 instead of $1.52, and that's going to bring him $165,000. And so for a profit of $13,000. So in other words, he's agreeing to buy them for $1.52. He's convinced that they're going to be at $1.65 in 3 months. And so he does this contract, and what do you know? He's making all this money because he was right. So that means then the following. If an investor wants to protect himself from the risk of a rising exchange rate, in other words, weakening dollar, or wants to speculate that the exchange rate will rise, the dollar will weaken, you will take out a long position in a forward contract. Either way, you're going to make a profit. I mean, in the case where the hedger locks in a price of 152, if the exchange rate goes up, he's going to save money. In the case of the speculator, if he's right and the exchange rate goes up, he makes a profit. Either way, the position he wants to be in is to have a long contract where you are the one who buys the pounds and pays the dollars. Okay, so I think I forgot to mention that up here somewhere, but if he does lock in the price of $1.52 and the exchange rate does go up, he'll just save money. On the other hand, what if it's the opposite? All right, so we want to understand why anyone would enter into a short contract. Oops, what happened there? If an investor wants to protect himself from the risk of a falling exchange rate, which could happen, strengthening dollar, or wants to speculate that the exchange rate will fall or the dollar will strengthen, he will then take out a short position in the forward contract. So in other words, he's agreeing to sell. And if he's right, then he'll either save money or he will make money, depending on which position he's in. All right, so that's the long and the short of a forward contract and the forward exchange rate. Now, that raises an interesting question. We said in our examples that the spot exchange rate was $1.50. Let's say $1.50 per pound. And the forward exchange rate, the 3-month forward exchange rate, is $1.52 per pound. What is the relationship between the spot and forward exchange rate, if any? In other words, are they directly connected to each other, or are they determined independently of each other? Well, I'm glad you asked. It turns out that there is a very specific mathematical formula that ties together the spot and forward exchange rates, known as the interest rate parity condition. If this relationship is violated, then there will be arbitrage opportunities for everyone. Okay, so just like the triangular arbitrage case, if the interest rate parity condition fails to hold, that implies that there are arbitrage opportunities to be had in this market. Okay, so that's what all this buildup has been for. This is our second arbitrage case. Before we were looking at cross exchange rates. Now we're looking at the relationship between spot and forward exchange rates. Okay, so we're going to look at that in very great detail, but first, I think it's high time that we had our break for the evening because this is a lot of material. So let's have our typical evening break. And when we get back, I'll show you this exact relationship and we'll start to try to understand how we can take advantage of any arbitrage opportunities that could arise. Okay, so let's knock it off for a bit. And then when we get back, we'll dive right into this interest rate parity condition. Okay. All right, here we are. So the formula, yes, let's get to it. It's exciting formula. So we're going to look at an example here. Oh, okay. Well, it looks like we have more side noting to do here. I just want to mention that, all right, there is a market you may have heard of called the Euro currency market. It's markets, I guess. So we need to introduce this before we talk about the forward exchange rates because, well, you'll see why in a second. A euro currency is a deposit of a currency in a bank outside of the country of origin. So, for example, euro dollars are typically, they don't have to be, but they're typically dollars deposited in British banks. That's actually the world center for the euro currency markets in London, actually. So euro dollars are dollars deposited in British banks. They are not converted into pounds, and they earn a rate based on the dollar, a rate of interest, I should say, based on the dollar, not the pound. Now, interestingly enough, the rate of interest that they pay was for all those years a rate called LIBOR, which we'll see in this in these slides. But what happened is that somewhere along the way, there was a scandal in which it turned out the LIBOR rates were being manipulated by banks like Barclays, for example, and they were doing that to make money and take advantage of their clients. And so because it turned out that it wasn't that difficult to manipulate these rates, it was agreed that another rate should take the place of LIBOR. So what I'm going to do is do a little checking right here because the transfer is supposed to take place very, very soon. So here we go. Let's see, when is LIBOR going to be replaced? Here it is. By 2022, LIBOR will be discontinued, which could mean big changes for companies. And then what's going to happen? It's going to be replaced by this new rate called SOFR. Yeah, which basically is set up by the Federal Reserve System in the United States. And so I'm not so sure where we stand right now with this. It is a benchmark for short-term interest rates ranging from overnight to a year across many different currencies. It has a critical role in global markets. It is now widely used as a reference rate for financial contracts and as a benchmark to gauge funding costs, et cetera, et cetera. And so basically, yes, we had that little crisis. And so now, oh, they've got a little chart here. They're showing us what's going to happen. So US LIBOR, which is the rate that was previously paid on euro dollar deposits, is going to be replaced with this SOFR measure. British LIBOR, or LIBOR rates paid on British pounds, are going to be replaced with this thing called SONIA, which I'd never heard of before. It looks like Japanese LIBOR, euro yen that is, are now going to be replaced with this thing called TONA. And the euro itself will have its own rate called Ester. Wow, I'd never heard of any of these before. This is going to be very, very difficult, very awkward for a while. And so what they're saying here is, how does SOFR differ from LIBOR? They're both short-term borrowing costs, but SOFR relies entirely on transactions data, whereas LIBOR is partially based on market data expert judgment. SOFR is purely a daily rate, where LIBOR had 7 rates going up from 1 year to 1 day to 1 year. Okay, LIBOR had a sort of a credit risk component, but where SOFR represents a pure risk-free rate of interest. How do you like that? Interesting. You know what? I'm going to actually save this article because this is extremely important for what we're doing here. In fact, I'm going to send a link to this article to everybody in the class because I think it's important for you to know about this. Or actually, I have a better idea. I'll just put it right here in the slides. So previously, or until recently, I guess we'll say, Eurodollar deposits were paid the dollar LIBOR rate of interest, which was very similar to the domestic US dollar rate of interest for deposits of the same maturity. Soon, LIBOR will be replaced in all countries with rates that are unique to those countries. And here's the article. This is explained in the following article. Okay, so you can read about this at your leisure. So just suffice it to say that LIBOR was the rate that was being paid. Now, unfortunately, because Barclays are crooks, and so some of the others were, we have to replace them all with these other unique rates, which each one depends on the domestic central banks. So, yeah, look at that. Isn't that interesting? I wasn't sure what they were planning on doing with the other euro currency rates. The dollar this SOFR is created by the Federal Reserve System, but these others have their own, like here, the Sterling Working Group on risk-free rates. They're all meant to be risk-free rates of interest, which means they have to be somehow tied to the domestic central bank and the treasury securities issued by those governments. So yeah, we only got quite a few of them. But yeah, all those decades. Actually, LIBOR had been around since the 50s, and it survived for over 50 years, 60 really, until all this corruption came to light. So, wow, that is so interesting. All right, well, anyway, so let's just, it's for the purposes of the slides, why don't we just pretend that Eurodollar rates are still going to be set equal to LIBOR, and then we also will have other currencies as well. For example, Euro yen deposits are yen deposits held outside of Japan. Typically, like I said, in London, but not always. And now for the British pound, these deposits are called Euro sterling deposits, are deposits held outside of the UK, possibly the United States, okay? So it always has to be in a foreign country, and yet there's still, let's say, for example, the dollars. Normally, if you wanted to deposit dollars in a British bank account, you would have to convert them into pounds. But here, you're not doing that. You're keeping them in the form of dollars. And because of that, the interest rate that you're being paid is based on the fact that they're dollars. So in the past, it would have been dollar LIBOR. Now it'll be this SOFR thing. Same thing with British pounds. They were typically held in a foreign country, typically the United States, and they would have been paid what would have been called British pound LIBOR. Now they're going to be calling it SONIA. That's interesting. So SONIA now becomes the rate paid on euro sterling deposits. But the bottom line is that these rates are very close to being risk-free. And so in our model that we're about to look at of the relationship between spot and forward exchange rates, we're going to use these rates of interest in that formula. Okay, so that's what this is all about. We need to know those rates in order to calculate the correct relationship between the spot and the forward exchange rate. So you can see down here, the relationship between the dollar and the pound spot exchange rate and the 90-day dollar pound forward exchange rate is based ultimately on the 90-day euro dollar and euro sterling deposit rates. Again, they were previously known as LIBOR. Now they're going to have specialized names. But the bottom line is these are risk-free rates of interest, more or less, that have the same maturity as the forward exchange rate, in this case, 90 days. So this is what the formula looks like. It's not that complicated, but you'll notice that it has 360 in it. And that might change, by the way, with these new measurements. Previously, the reason why we have 360 in there is because, let me mention this, in the euro currency markets, and they may decide to keep this, in the euro currency markets, the interest rates are calculated based on a 360-day year. Okay, so this means that a month is treated as 30 days. All right, now it turns out that there are many financial securities have slightly different interest rate conventions. We can have the convention where we have 30 days in a month and 360 days in a year. We also could have 30 days in a month and 365 days in a year. There's a lot of other possibilities, but in these markets, we typically had 30 days representing a month and 360 days representing a year. So in this formula that you'll see, we have F is the forward exchange rate, and it's being quoted in days. So in other words, F is the N day forward exchange rate. N is right here. In other words, if this is, so for example, and this is why the day count conventions matter. For example, if this is a 3-month forward exchange rate, it is treated as 90 days out of a total of 360 days in the year. So in other words, in this formula we're about to use, for a 3-month forward exchange rate, you would have 90 over 360 up here. This is the domestic rate of interest. And when I say the domestic rate of interest, what I really mean is the euro currency rate for that country. This is the so-called foreign rate of interest. And then E is the spot exchange rate. All right, so for example, let's just say that we're looking at the dollar and the pound. All right, so what this means then is that what we're actually looking at here is this. So this is the formula. So what that means is that F is quoted as dollars per pound. So F is dollars per pound. E is dollars per pound. And then R is the euro dollar rate of interest. And R star would be the euro sterling rate. And then N is the number of days. For 90 days or 3 months, we would put in a 30 there. Now, by the way, I forgot to mention when I was talking before about these different euro currency rates, why is the British pound called the euro sterling? And that's because, I'll just put a little note here in case you didn't realize it, but the actual name of the British currency is the pound sterling, okay? When we call it the pound, we're using the unofficial name. It's actually known as the pound sterling, which refers back to the Middle Ages when all coins were made out of silver. Okay, so it really meant silver. The pound was literally made out of silver. And so the name has stuck with us to this day. So in the euro currency markets, if they're not called euro pounds, they're called euro sterling. I think you'll agree it sounds just a little bit more elegant, sterling rather than pounds. Anyway, so that's the origin of that name. So if I'm going to calculate the forward exchange rate between the dollar and the pound, this is the formula that I'll use. And I've got to make sure that I'm consistent here. If I'm using the quotes in dollars per pound, which we will be doing throughout this book, then R becomes the US rate or euro dollar rate. R star must be the euro sterling rate. And N is the number of days until the currency is delivered. In this case, the pound is delivered through this forward contract. And again, it is based on a 360-day year because that's the convention that's followed by these two rates of interest. And this formula is what we mean by the interest rate parity condition. Okay, so this is the relationship that must hold in order to prevent arbitrage opportunities. Okay, so we're going to see some examples of how this works. So, and we could use this with any currencies we want, but we'll primarily focus on the dollar and the pound just to keep it simple. We might sometimes use the dollar and the euro, but for the most part, we'll stick with dollars and pounds. Okay. Yeah, this is an interesting question if they're going to keep the 3360-day years when we switch over to those new rates. You know what? Let me just quickly check that out, just out of curiosity. When LIBOR is abandoned, will the euro currency markets continue to use a 3360-day count convention? No. Yeah, it doesn't say. Anyway, but yes, until now, I mean, I don't know. They may decide to keep it just to make things less stressful when they switch over, because people are used to 3360. But it doesn't seem to say here what they're planning on doing. Now, there's an article here about why are they getting rid of it in the first place. And they're saying, yeah, look, for more than 40 years, LIBOR has been a key benchmark and for all kinds of interest rate products. And what happened? Oh, the crisis. Oh my God. But really, it was LIBOR manipulation. Look at these banks. Oh. But Barclays is the key player in this complicated scam. Okay. All right. Anyway, so I guess we don't know just yet, but Let's assume that we'll continue to use a 360-day convention, which again means that when it comes time to calculate your interest, you're going to pretend that each month has 30 days and each year has 360 days. So therefore, a 90-day forward exchange rate would mean that this ratio, 90 over 360, is exactly 0.25 or a quarter of a year. All right. So let's do an example. Suppose that the 180-day euro-dollar deposit rate is 2.89%, and the 180-day euro-sterling deposit rate is 4.7521%. The spot exchange rate is $1.8693 per pound. So what is the implied 180-day forward exchange rate? And when we say applied, we mean by the interest rate parity condition. So we plug in the numbers, and you can double check this with your calculator if you want to, and you'll see that with a spot exchange rate of 186.93, the implied 180-day or 6 months basically forward exchange rate is 1.8523. Now, I do want to point out that because of the way this formula is written, if the domestic rate is less than the foreign rate, which it is here, the forward exchange rate is less than the spot exchange rate, which means as if the US has lower rates of interest than the UK, then it'll get cheaper to buy pounds as we look further and further into the future. Okay, so here it becomes cheaper to buy pounds further into the future. So in other words, if I wait for a year instead of 6 months, it'll be even cheaper. On the other hand, of course, if US rates are higher, it'll be the other way around. So this is why you can see that it's cheaper to buy pounds for delivery in 6 months than to buy them today, because US rates are lower than UK rates. And again, when I say UK rates, I mean euro sterling deposit rates versus the euro dollar rate. Okay, that's the relationship we're looking for. Now, that raises an interesting question. What if this is not the forward exchange rate that we observe in the marketplace? I pick up the phone and call a dealer and say, listen, I want to buy pounds for delivery in 6 months. What rate will you quote me? And they give me a quote which is different than 1.8523. Why is this an arbitrage opportunity, and how do I take advantage of it? Good question. Now, this is a fairly complicated process because it involves borrowing in one currency and lending in the other, and entering into a forward contract to eliminate all of our foreign exchange risk. So there's multiple steps involved. So how does this work? Well, first of all, I wanted to show you something interesting. The forward exchange rate that is derived from this condition is the only rate at which an investor would earn the same rate of return by holding both currencies. So what do I mean by that? If you're an American investor, you have the opportunity to earn 2.89% for 180 days. Now, there's no foreign exchange risk because you just keep your money in, let's say, a euro-dollar deposit. But keep in mind, you're only keeping the money there for 180 days, so you're only earning half of this over that period. Because remember, we're treating years having 360 days. So let's say I start with $1 million, in 180 days, I'll have $1,014,450. And if you notice what I've done, I've multiplied the $1 million times 1 plus. The interest rate is 2.89% on an annual basis, but because I'm only holding the money for 6 months, I'm actually only earning half of this, 1.445%. And so in 6 months, the deposit in my, or the balance in my euro dollar deposit will be worth $1,014,450. What if I decided to invest in a euro sterling account instead? Well, the first thing I have to do is take my dollars and convert them into pounds at the spot exchange rate. I then put them in my euro sterling account, and then I'm going to enter into a forward contract to sell the balance of that account for dollars through this forward contract. And by doing so, I will eliminate all foreign exchange risk. All right, well, let's see how that works. And by the way, if there's risk involved on either side, then this doesn't work. Because remember, arbitrage implies a risk-free profit. Okay, so the first step would be to take my $1 million and convert them into pounds at the current spot exchange rate, which will get me, as you can see, $534,959 and 61 pence. Now that money is going to go into a euro sterling account, and I'm going to earn the UK rate of interest. Okay. Previously, it was British pound LIBOR. Now I guess it's going to be SONIA. So we've already seen in the example that that's going to pay me 4.7521% for half a year. So I'm going to multiply the balance, the starting balance, by 1 plus the interest rate times this, which just reflects the fact that it's only a 6-month deposit. And so that means in 6 months, I'll have this many pounds in my account. This is known to me today. There's no mystery about this. So while I'm busily setting up my deposit here, I'm also going to enter into a forward contract in which I can sell this many pounds for dollars in 180 days. What exchange rate will we use in this contract? That will be the 6-month forward exchange rate of 1.8523 that we just figured out from the interest rate parity condition. So therefore, when I sell these through that contract, I have my pounds in 6 months. I close out my account. I take the pounds and I sell them through that forward contract at the forward exchange rate, which we saw earlier. And guess what? That will be worth exactly $1,014,450. So what happened here was that by keeping my money in euro dollars, I was able to earn $1,014,450. By putting them in a euro sterling account, along with a forward contract, I also earned this much money. But the whole thing depends here on this being the correct forward exchange rate. If it's different, then I will make more money from one currency than the other. And that opens up the doors to an arbitrage profit. Now, there's a diagram we can use that'll help us visualize what just happened. Across the top, I kept my money in euro dollars very simply for 180 days, and I wound up with $1,014,450. Over here, instead, I chose to invest in euro sterling by first converting the dollars into pounds, depositing them in the euro sterling account, and collecting this at the end of 6 months, and simultaneously entering into a forward contract to sell them back for dollars at this forward exchange rate, which of course brings me right back here to $1,014,450. So that tells me that this is the correct forward exchange rate, because you can see there's no arbitrage opportunities. But if this number is off, that means one currency will be more profitable than the other. And that, as we'll see, gives me the opportunity to earn arbitrage profits. And now here, there's a special name for this. The type of arbitrage that we'll be able to earn is called covered interest arbitrage. Because in the process of doing this, you are covering or hedging your foreign exchange risk with a forward contract. And by doing that, you are locking in risk-free profits when the forward exchange rate deviates from the correct value. So now, this is a very complicated process. So I think what we should probably do here, since we covered so much material tonight, is maybe stop right about here. Next week, we could go back and revisit some of these details. And then when we get back to the example, I think it'll make perfect sense how exactly we're earning arbitrage profits with, in this case. All right. And there's two ways, of course. F could be too low, it could be too high. We have to know how to make profits in either case. But it's not a quick and simple process. So we'll have to build up to it slowly and really and truly understand what's happening. All right. So why don't we stop right here, and we'll pick this up where we left off next week. And then after this is done, we can go on to part B, and we'll see more about the relationship between exchange rates and interest rates. All right, so I guess that will be it for now. Unless there's any last minute questions, I guess we'll just see you all next Thursday. All right.
Thank you.
Have a good night,
All right.
Professor.
Have a good night, Professor.
See you later.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Okay, bye.